Florence, are you ready to continue with chapter 23? I like the beginning picture of this one. It looks like a broken pair of eyeglasses, and it says best laid plans. Were you followed? Aunt Inheritance hissed. She looked as if she had been dragged through a hedge backwards, and the hedge had put up a fight. Furl your sails, Inheritance, said Maelstrom. There's no one in our wake. They're all distracted. Shenanigan took in the room around her. She had such high expectations that almost anything was going to be a letdown, but this was particularly disappointing. For a start, there wasn't any gold or bones, just a lot of paper. Long, thin tangles of it collected in the corners. Huge sheets of it, covered in numbers and diagrams, overlapped on the table, their curled edges weighed down with empty cups and saucers. Tall stacks of books lounged against the wall. The mysterious tubes Shenanigan had seen Inheritance carrying on her first night in the house were tossed to one side empty, and a small camp bed and picnic baskets had been crammed into what little space remained. No wonder Aunt Inheritance looked so crumbled. She must have been sleeping in here, holed up like a hamster in a paper nest. There were 3 other unusual things in the room. One was Felicity, who regarded Shenanigan with red-rimmed eyes. The next was Phenomena, who was making notes in her casebook and pretending her sister didn't exist. The third was a large object in the center of a table, covered with a white sheet. Shenanigan immediately went to peek underneath, but Aunt Inheritance let out a noise like a deranged cat and slapped her hand away. "Ow!" Shenanigan yelped. "Uncle Maelstrom, what's going on, and why are you 2 here?" She glowered at Phenomena and Felicity. "I was fetched under duress by Aunt Inheritance," Felicity said, "and Uncle M found Phenomena knocking on a totally innocent patch of wall down the corridor." Phenomena's lips pursed, but she didn't look up from her notes. "Never mind, I'm sure you would have found the room eventually," Shenanigan said with a smirk. Uncle Maelstrom leaned over before another argument could break out and tapped the document on the table. "Shenanigan, do you recognize these?" Shenanigan looked at the papers. They were plans of the Swift estate throughout history. In one of them, the tower and conservatory were missing, and half the rooms were the wrong shape and size. In another, the tower was there, but it was called the turret instead. The original plan didn't even have the lake, just a sketch of an enormous oak tree. It made Shenanigan feel dizzy, seeing the house she knew so well, with all of its insides rearranged. "This one is the newest," said Uncle Maelstrom. He slid over the least yellowed sheet to Shenanigan, dated 1900. The afternoon room wasn't there, but plans for the hedge maze had just been sketched, and there was a small warren labeled servants' quarters from when the family had servants. She frowned. "They're all wrong." Uncle Maelstrom nodded. It's this house that has the problem. It's near unmappable. It's like living in a giant game of musical chairs, only it's more like musical architecture. He scrubbed a hand over his face. It's impossible to know which secret chambers are still secret and which have been sealed up. Whether the Horde even... Steady. At the mention of the Horde, Shenanigan had sprung onto a chair so that she was as close to eye level as her uncle and begun prodding him in the chest with a finger. "I knew it. You've been looking for the treasure without me. That was why he'd been so shifty about the map. We were supposed to be allies." Uncle Maelstrom bowed his head apologetically. And I hope you'll also still consider us so." "How long have you been looking?" Uncle Maelstrom cleared his throat. "It was a hobby," he hedged, "for a few years. One I gave up soon after you were born." Aunt Inheritance tapped the table. "Shenanigan, this is serious. Looking for Vile's Horde isn't a game. Or rather, it was a game, but now it's most definitely not." She smoothed the hand over the papers. Focusing on the documents rather than on the other people in the room seemed to help calm Inheritance. It made her twitch less, at least. Like your uncle, I've been researching the Horde on and off ever since I became the archivist. For our history, you understand. Recently, it has become an urgent task. Urgent? Asked Felicity. Inheritance coughed. The family funds have become somewhat depleted of late, she said. We're broke, Uncle Maelstrom summarized. Well, we've been broke for a while, but now we're the house is falling down around us broke. Shenanigan was gobsmacked. She thought all the wear and tear was a deliberate style choice. For the past 3 years, I have devoted all my spare time to the search for the Horde, said Inheritance. I tracked down rare documents, scoured libraries, and visited every Swift who would speak to me in the hope of finding a clue. The fruits of my labor are in this room. She gestured to the wealth of the paper. A few months ago, I finally found a lead. I called the reunion and unwittingly called down doom upon our house. Now our matriarch is ill. It is imperative that we find the Horde as soon as possible. What? Why? Because one, said Phenomena, staring at her case notes, if the treasure is found, it legally belongs to the matriarch, and we don't have a matriarch right now. 2, because of a large number of our family are here, and they're looking for the Horde. If someone finally finds it with no matriarch, they might just decide to keep it for themselves. And 3, whoever pushed Aunt Schadenfreude, squashed Gumshoe, and shot Pamplemousse isn't hunting for the treasure as a fun family activity. They're willing to kill for it. Precisely. Inheritance nodded. Your uncle thinks you, Shenanigan, are the key to the Horde's location. I have my doubts, but my methods, and she glanced to the object covered in a white cloth, were thoroughly scoffed at, so I've agreed to let him have first crack at it. This is why your map is important, Shenanigan, said Maelstrom. The house has been dug up, swapped around, and shuffled like a pack of cards so often that everything from side buildings to suitcases has changed position. Look. He picked up a map dated 1799 and laid one dated 1900 over the top of it. The paper was thin. Both versions of the house were visible, the old and new. I think if we put all these plans together, we can figure out where the Horde is. We know what we're looking for, a space that's been untouched since Vile's day. Somewhere the treasure could have sat in the dark for years. But these are all useless without your map, Shenanigan. These tell us the way things were. We now need you to tell us the way things are. It's my map, said Shenanigan sullenly. It is, said Maelstrom, and you were the only one who could have made it. No one in the world knows this house better than a naughty child who grows up in it. Her uncle's beloved face was open and earnest. Now that he'd come clean, the little nagging dishonesties that had flickered like shadows on his face were gone. But Shenanigan remembered seeing them and how much they had hurt. You lied! I'm sorry, but really I didn't lie, Maelstrom pointed out. I simply didn't tell the truth. Having her own logic turned back on her was not very pleasant. Shenanigan thought it over, chewing her thumb. If she had handed over her map, she was giving away the best advantage she had over her relatives. But this was Uncle Maelstrom, who had earned her loyalty every day of her life. He could easily demand that she give him the map, or just take it out of her pocket, or shout at her. But she loved him so much because she knew in her bones he would never, ever do any of those things. Shenanigan reached into her back pocket for the map. It wasn't there. Shenanigan did the frantic pat-down everyone does when they've lost their wallet or inhaler or their one-of-a-kind map. It's gone, she whispered. Uncle Maelstrom's brows overhung his eyes like a low fog. Shenanigan. I'm not lying, Shenanigan insisted. Don't make a mark in my column, Phenomena. I'm not going to trick you. It really is gone. I promise. It's all right, Skipper, Maelstrom murmured, laying a soothing hand on top of her head. The weight was familiar and reassuring, and it was supposed to mean it's not your fault. But it was. Shenanigan didn't know what to say. Sometimes she put things down and forgot where she left them. But that was why she filled her pockets with so many useful bits, so she always had a steady supply. The map was the only thing of hers that was completely irreplaceable. She didn't even know when she had lost it. It's not all right, said Inheritance tightly. If the killer gets a hold of it, they will have the advantage. They will just have a great tool for finding the hoard. They'll have a map of all the secret passages, hidden ways, and hiding places you found. Who knows what they could do with that? There was a moment of quiet. Very well, Inheritance, said Maelstrom heavily. I suppose we'll have to do this your way. Inheritance's gloved hands made a muffled sound as she clapped them together. I'm telling you, it will work, Maelstrom. There was a manic light in her eyes again. I don't like it, he said glumly. It's like whistling in the wind. It means trouble. Stop being cryptic, said Phenomena. Aunt Inheritance, what's your idea? Inheritance had drifted over to the covered object on the table. As I said, my search for the hoard has been mostly fruitless, she murmured, until a few days ago when I found these. She held up her glasses and pulled off the arm to show them all the tiny key. They were up for auction, along with an old journal belonging to great-great-aunt Memento, a previous archivist. I try to buy as many family heirlooms as I can for our collection. In that journal, Memento wrote about this room and what it contained, and I was shocked to learn that though it had been found incontrovertible evidence that the treasure not only existed but remained undiscovered. I called the reunion, as I said. I left my library armed with my maps and research. I wanted to open this room, share my discovery with the matriarch, and enlist the help of the family in recovering our lost fortune, so we could save our ancestral home. But Aunt Schadenfreude, Inheritance's expression clouded. She said I was a fool and Memento a crackpot. She said the family would never work together, and all I was doing was inviting mayhem and selfishness. And she said that she definitely, unequivocally, didn't believe in this. She whipped the sheet off the table to reveal a strange, squat object, a complex machine of brass and dark wood. What looked like an old hearing trumpet sprouted from one side, and a large, antique-looking glass bulb bulged from the top. This, said Aunt Inheritance, patting the machine, was the subject of Memento's journal, the Ecto-Electric Kin Communicator, or EEC for short. Shenanigan eyed the machine with distrust. There was something about it that made her teeth ache. The light bulb on top seemed to stare at her like a dead and furious eye, and the small slot in its body was too much like a mouth, and yet she knew that if nobody else were in the room, she'd be trying her hardest to switch it on. What is it? Breathed Shenanigan. It's a machine for talking to the dead, intoned Aunt Inheritance. Yes, hissed Shenanigan. Nope, said Phenomena and Felicity together. Their faces were a study in opposites. Felicity was leaning as far away from the machine as possible. Phenomena was suppressing giggles. That's preposterous, she hiccuped. You can't talk to the dead. They're dead. Aunt Inheritance huffed. It was made by Charlatan Swift in 1888. She and Memento conducted the seance themselves. She swore it worked. Yes, and her name was Charlatan, scoffed Phenomena. She might as well have been called Fibberswift. Memento detailed the whole encounter in her journal, insisted Inheritance. She said the spirit she contacted even told her how to find the hoard. I don't suppose she wrote that down? Asked Felicity skeptically. Alas, she took the secret to her grave. And I don't suppose anyone thought to ring her up afterwards, no? So let me get this straight. Felicity folded her arms, which was her attack position. This is the incontrovertible evidence you were talking about? You called the reunion and came all the way over here because you think you can ring up a dead relative and just ask them where the treasure is? Yes, said Aunt Inheritance. Felicity turned to Maelstrom. And you think this is a sensible idea? Of course not. That's why I wanted the map. He frowned. You shouldn't interfere with spirits. Right. Well, since the only sensible person in the house is unconscious, I officially give up, said Felicity, and she threw herself back in the chair, defeated. For Shenanigan, the day was improving rapidly. Talking to the dead? She tried using a Ouija board once before, but had got a very boring ghost who wouldn't answer her questions and just kept asking why the wine tasted funny. The EEK, or eek, felt different. Her fingers itched to touch it. Despite its age, the brass still shone and the wood gleamed. Perhaps Aunt Inheritance had cleaned it, but somehow Shenanigan didn't think so. It could have been locked in this room for centuries, and dust would not have settled on its surface. How does it work? She asked. Inheritance had been puffed up with excitement. The question defeated her slightly. Well, currently it doesn't. I can turn it on, but it just spits out rolls and rolls of gibberish. She gestured toward the tumbleweeds of tangled paper that had drifted up into the corners of the room. Well, of course it doesn't work, sniffed Phenomena. Ghosts aren't real. There's absolutely no scientific evidence to support them. Besides, that EMF meter has been completely disconnected, the seismometer is loose, and there's a mouse skeleton blocking the gears. There was a brief silence. Well, blow me down. I can't believe you didn't notice the skeleton, muttered Maelstrom. Inheritance grabbed Phenomena's shoulders. Phenomena, are you saying that you can get this up and running? With difficulty, Phenomena shrugged. Give me 10 minutes and a set of pliers. I can make it work how it's supposed to, but even if I can't make it talk to ghosts. She began to fiddle away at the back of the machine, muttering to herself all the while. Shenanigan and Felicity shared a fond look and a smile over their sister's head until they suddenly remembered their feud and stared resolutely in opposite directions. Uncle Maelstrom considered the two of them. Not had a falling out, have we? The sisters' answering silence was pointed at both ends. He sighed. I truly believe you three girls are the smartest people in this whole house. That's why I brought you in here. I trust you further than I could throw you. And believe me, I could throw you very far. Let's ask the girls for help, I said to Inheritance. Put them together and they could steer a galleon through a gale with their arms tied behind their backs. But for such a clever people, you can be very careless. But, began Shenanigan, careless. A crew can bicker and fight among themselves all they like when the wind is calm. But when the pressure drops and the storm comes rolling in, they know to stow it. They trusted one another with their lives. He gathered them both in a hug that swallowed them whole. You're all on the same crew. Act like it. There was a loud click behind them as of an old wooden panel being slotted back into place. Fixed it, said Phenomena. And that is the end of that chapter. When we pick up next time, it'll be chapter 24. We're getting there. Look at that. If you look at where we are. Do you think the machine's going to work? I kind of don't think so. But we'll find out. Until we read again, my lovely. Kisses.